So I want to talk about marriage. I want to talk about the most important institution that exists in the world. Every institution in our world is foundationally affected by marriage. Governments, churches, every institution is made up of people. People are products of families, and families are products of relationship. People are either going to be healthy, adjusted people, or they're going to be unhealthy, wounded people. And behind a healthy family is a healthy marriage. It's definitely possible to come out of a broken home or a broken family and be adjusted and healthy. Romans 8:28 says that God will work all things together for good for those who love Him and are called according to His purposes. But our entire goal is to give our kids and our families the best of what we have. So the question I'd like to start with is, how much of a priority is your marriage? If you make a mental graph and you compare the amount of time you spend with dates or finances or time invested in your marriage, in your relationship, compared to time at work or time watching TV or time with your hobbies, how lopsided does it look? I say that because generally, the amount of time we put into our marriage versus the rest of the things in our lives is usually pretty lopsided. If you consider how important, how incredibly important marriage is to the world, to our families. Falaki and I have a good relationship, and at times we have a great relationship. But it doesn't matter who you are, if you're not intentionally investing into your relationship, it will devolve. And best case scenario, it'll be a boring roommate situation. And worst case scenario, it's jail time. So what I'd like to do is challenge each person to sit down and have an open evaluation of your marriage with your husband or your wife. Designate some time to sit down and just be honest and open and talk. And this will be a place where you really figure out how much you have been investing or haven't been investing. So for some people, this will be an honest give and take, discussion, evaluation, intimacy time. And for some people, it will be a time for dealing with issues and dealing with unresolved conflicts. And either way, it's absolutely imperative that we do this as husbands, as wives, as spouses. As we're sitting down for a discussion like this, it's super key to lay out some foundational guidelines. And so here's some of the things that Falaki and I go by. Number one, we sit down and we put our hands on the table. It sounds odd, but the truth is we need to talk with our voices and not with our hands. And it can get misinterpreted or escalated when we talk with our hands too much. Number two is don't raise your voice. Don't yell. Just talk. Just talk. Number three is no interrupting. You gotta let each other talk and don't interrupt. It's so important to listen, and to be listening and to be perceived as listening. The next one is don't go on a 20-minute dialogue. Just go point by point and don't list 1,000 things that happened with no time to respond. One thing that's really important is to not play ping pong. If someone brings up an issue, you gotta stop and you have to talk about it, you have to deal with it. And the ping pong is when someone brings up an issue and the other person comes back with, well, you did this, and then you did this, and then all it does is pile up and it doesn't solve anything. Another one is don't ever say never and don't ever say always. Like, you never do this or you always do this. Nobody always does something or never does something. The fact is, if you say you always do this, that person's gonna think of the one time they didn't do that, and they're gonna be like, no, I don't. See, you're wrong, and it doesn't go anywhere. So it's super key to never say never and to never say always. Don't be the couple that needs a third party to come in because someone's not listening. Don't use kids. Don't bring them in to say, aren't they like that, or don't they do that? It just puts them in an awful position. One thing that guys tend to do is they tend to get kind of mathematical to where if the girl's hurt, girls do this too, so it goes both ways, but If someone's hurt, they're like, well, this plus this plus this means you're obviously not hurt. And so it's just so key. If someone's hurt, just listen to them. And the fact is they're hurt, and no math is going to add up to them not being hurt. I'd say one of the biggest things is to be humble, because we can follow all these little guidelines, but if we're prideful and we're there to point fingers, nothing will get solved. And the entire point of this is unity. The entire point of this is intimacy. And no matter what, at the end of this, we have to end it with a hug and with saying, I love you. And if you're in a place where you can't do that, you can't hug and you can't say I love you, then your heart is wrong. And you need to deal with your heart, because our heart has to be towards our spouse in a direction of I love you. And because that is the entire point of us doing this, is to come into unity and come into closer love. One question that I feel God asks me often is, am I treating Falake in the way that I would want a guy to treat one of my daughters? Because I see my daughters and they're so pure and they're so tender, and the way that I want a guy to treat them is the way that I need to be treating my wife. And Falake's tough and she's strong, and sometimes it's easy to forget that I need to approach her like 1 Peter says, husbands, in the same way be considerate as you live with your wives. Treat them with respect as the weaker partner and as heirs with you of the gracious gift of life. And when it says weaker, it's not saying less strength. It's saying delicate as like crystal or as porcelain, to where we approach them from that angle of gentleness and kindness. And so when I look at Falake, who's tough and she's independent, and I need to remember that she is like my daughters, that I need to be tender and kind and make her father proud of how I treat her. I was talking about some of this with the family, and Ruth asked me, what happens if you have an unreasonable mate, somebody who won't come to the table and they won't sit down? And I said, ultimately, Ruth, choose the right person, because the person you marry has access to your soul in a way that no one else does. And ultimately, it's up to them if they'll be reasonable, if they'll sit down, if they'll deal kindly in conflict. And it's up to them, because ultimately you have no power over what they do. And that's how people get in trouble, is they try to manipulate their husband or their wife to come to the bargaining table. And it just makes things 10 times worse. I would say to someone who's in a marriage where the other person is not reasonable and they're not willing to come and sit down together, it sounds cliche, but God is the only one that can change someone's heart. And trying to manipulate them, trying to change them will not help, because if we strive to gain, we strive to maintain. But if we really trust God and if we really give it to Him, He will take and work all things for good for those of us who are called according to His purposes, who love Him. When it comes down to it, marriage is the most important institution and relationship in the world. This is the closest person to you that there can possibly be. And this is the most important relationship in the world. We need to make sure that everything we're doing, all of our investments, are proportional to the immense importance that a marriage is to our family and ultimately to the world.
Show us your mercy, culture, God. Teach us to love and reach the lost. Help us to daily bear our cross, to be more like you, to be more like you. We want to be more like you, Jesus. dark. We want your fire inside of us. Set us apart in light of the dark.